Walter will start the meeting.
I'm not very good at multitasking, doing 3 or 4 things at one time, especially on a computer that's not mine. Anyways, I'm Walter Popoff. I'm the Area H Director for the Spokane Valley. For those that don't know me, and for those that know me, welcome and thank you for coming. And normally we don't get a turnout like this during a budget meeting in the northern portion of the valley. We generally always have a Jan and maybe a counselor from New Denver and a counselor from Silverton. So hopefully you'll have some questions for Yeb and myself. And you know, I'd like to keep the meeting a little bit more orderly so it doesn't run away. So if you have a question, whatever, either wave your hand and say Walter, and I'll recognize you, or just all around Walter. You don't have to use director or any formal name, stuff like that. So we did a presentation in Spokane Park, and we had a very good turnout. I believe between 25 to 30 people there. And I know Hal was there, and Vito were there. So, and you're here too, so you're keeping in touch with what the budget is. And for Hal, I did forward your information to our staff for response. They're working on it.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll start the meeting, and I will introduce our CFO, Yeb Malek, who's the Chief Financial Officer for the Regional District. And I think everybody knows Leah Main, who's the Regional District Representative from the village of Silverton. And Len was going to be here today, but he got diverted, so he's not here today. Understanding? Yeah. Okay, Yep, it's all yours.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Walter, and welcome, Leah, and welcome everybody who's here, as well as welcome everybody who's online to take part in the meeting. So just let everybody know this meeting's virtual, so it is being broadcast virtually, both sound and video, and we've had another meeting. So the regional district is not recording this meeting, but others online might be recording it, and it might end up on YouTube or elsewhere, just to let people know that we don't have any control of that, and so that might happen. So basically this evening, I've got a presentation that I'm going to go through, and I'll stop if there's any questions. Once I finish a slide or anything, then feel free to put up your hand and ask some questions. And between Walter, Lee, and myself, we'll do our best to answer those questions. Okay, so I will just get my presentation going here. I'm just going to wait till the presentations. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Just do a slight adjustment here. Maybe if I can get it a little bit better. I'm not. No, I think that's about as good as we're going to get it. Okay, so again, welcome everyone. So I'll just go forward to the agenda here. So we're not assuming everybody knows how the regional district functions are divided up. So we'll do a very brief overview of the regional district and services, a quick summary of where we ended up last year, or forecast ended up last year. We'll talk about property assessments, because that's one area there's often misunderstandings about. And so we'll talk about that. We'll do a general overall outlook for the budget for 2024, do a service by service discussion, and then look at how those services affect your property taxes, depending on where you live in the area. So the web page for this meeting, it contains, it's already been posted, I believe a couple days ago, the budget statements for Area H in its entirety. For the north, and this presentation will be posted tomorrow on that same webpage. So it'll be available then. Okay, one reminder is the current financial plan is a draft plan, so it's not final. The board will be approving the final plan in 3 weeks on March 21st board meeting. So there's still ongoing meetings, including these public meetings. There's committee and commission, some committee meetings coming up that will potentially impact the budget. So in the week prior to the meeting, we'll hope to have the final or the draft final budget based on any changes between now and then will be incorporated in that and be presented in the board for review. And as well, the March 21st board meeting, the board can also direct amendments to the budget as well. So even what we published the week before the meeting is not final either. So there's still potential for change there, and where there already is change in the budget. So the budget, this meeting's based on, and all the public meetings are based on, is the budget that was posted to the website last week on February 21st. A little bit about the regional district services model. Go to the left there. So the regional district has 186 different services. And each one of those services is accounted for individually as its own service. It needs to stand on its own, and we can't move funds and surpluses and deficits between the services. So if there's a surplus or deficit in that service, then that surplus or deficit will be carried forward into the next year and will affect taxation in the next year. The big difference between a municipality, or one of the big differences between a municipality and a regional district, is that a municipality, for the most part, the funds are all in one big bucket, and they could be moved from roads to sidewalks to utilities, and versus the regional district, each service is budgeted for on its own. The funds are kept there on its own and accounted for on its own. So those 186 services roughly could be put into these 8 buckets here. So governance and administration. So governance is basically the board of directors, any costs associated with them. Administration is finance, IT, HR, corporate admin, and items like that. One of the other big buckets is resource recovery. So the regional district is responsible for basically managing waste, recycling and composting organics for the entire regional district, including the municipalities. And then recreation and parks, all the way from small community halls all the way to our large recreation centers in Nelson, Castlegar, and Preston. Fire protection is another big one. We have 17 fire halls, rural fire halls that the regional district looks after. Then we have sustainability, development, planning, and land use, building inspection. Some municipalities participate in that. A number of water systems and other utilities, and then as well as taxation to fund other societies and organizations. Any questions on that? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious, if there's 186 services, are they specific to individual locations? Like say a water, local water system, or things like fire halls, is each fire hall one of those 186?
For the most part. So there's different combinations. So in area H South, 4 fire halls are all combined for one service.
Okay.
And so it's a good question. So we have some water utilities might only have 12 users, and so those are the 12 properties that are paying into that water service. Yeah. General administration, everybody across the regional district pays into it. So each service has a different group of areas participating in that service. So it's a range from the entire regional district, a sub-region, one electoral area, or a defined area in that electoral area that's participating in that service.
One more question.
Sure.
Is there something online or somewhere where we can see a breakdown of the services that apply to the regional district generally as compared to site specific?
Right, so there's a consolidated financial plan that's about 300 pages long. And so that's posted under the financial reports area of the regional district. So if you go on there, it'll show you for each service, all the participants in that service. And on the front section, it's what we call our cover sheets. It shows for it's sort of the opposite way. And I'll talk a bit about it here. For each electoral area municipality, the services that it participates in.
Thank you.
So it works both ways. So all the information is there. So you can come at it from the service perspective, or you could come at it from the rural or from the area perspective.
Thanks.
Okay.
Just got a little bit of technical difficulty.
So you were trying to send a message? Yes. This is good. Okay, just monitor chat. Okay. Okay, so here's a couple maps of the regional district. The one on the left is the entire regional district. The one on the right is all the electoral areas and most of the municipalities. So area H is right in the middle there, kind of the bluish purple color. You can just make out Slocan Lakes, Village of Slocan on the bottom, and then Silverton and New Denver near the top or the middle top of the lake. So yesterday, as Walter mentioned, we had a meeting for the south portion of Area H, including the Village of Slocan. Today we'll focus on the north, but just in case some residents of Slocan are here tonight or listening in, I've included some aspects of the Village of Slocan today. But Mayor Lunn was at the meeting yesterday, so she was there to answer any questions. We'll touch briefly on the strategic plan. So the current board was elected in the fall of 2022. So last year they worked on a strategic plan that will be guiding many or add guidance to many of their projects, initiatives, whether existing or new, as far from a strategic perspective. So here are the key priorities from the strategic plan. And this plan should be posted online fairly soon. And under each one of these priorities is about 8 objectives that further define and break out these priorities. Brief overview of 2023. So spending on wages, benefits, and services, and most other operating expenses is actually trending below budget for 2023. Spending on wages is low because at any point in time we have 10 or 20 positions that are unfilled because somebody's left to take a job elsewhere or do whatever. So we budget as though that person's there for the full year because it's impossible to predict who's going to be leaving, when they're going to be leaving, and in which service that's going to happen. And if we try to account for that and say, oh, on average 10% are gone at a time, then we run the risk of that service not being funded properly. And so if there's any surplus in that service due to an underspend on any area, then that surplus will carry forward the next year and reduce taxation in the next year. So that's basically how that model works. On sort of the counter side of it, if we know there's an open position And we're not gonna, at the beginning of the year, we're not gonna hire for it, say, till June. We'll budget only half a year for that position. So we do as best as we can, given sort of the constraints of the regional district model to do budgeting that way. So what happens if somebody's not there, and what happens is either services are curtailed. So if we don't have lifeguards, then we might not run some facility as many hours as we projected, or we'll postpone projects, other initiative, or other staff will get stretched. They'll fill in that role, and some other work doesn't necessarily get done. So we manage that to, as best as we can. One of the main areas where wages were underspent was the utilities construction crew. So the utilities construction crew basically, for the most part, looks after, the plan was to look after replacing pipe for our water utilities. But basically what happened for the most part is that it was really difficult to find employees to gear up that construction crew, partly because it was seasonal, partly because of what our wages. So that crew was disbanded. It was a pilot project, so that crew is no longer part of the budget. And counter to that underspending, however, user fees and other sales or revenue items, for instance, building permits, also came in significantly under budget. So that countered the decreased staffing in some services. Capital projects are under budget, but capital projects are either funded by borrowing or transfers from from reserves to fund them. So we just didn't do that borrowing, or we didn't transfer in those reserves. And as mentioned before, the prior year surpluses and deficits, they're carried forward from individually in each service to reduce or increase taxation in future years. Yes?
With regards to surplus from prior year, is it reflected in the draft on that sheet?
It is. So our best estimate of the surplus at the time we run that budget is reflected in the draft budget. And our next update of the budget prior to the next board meeting those surpluses will be adjusted again based on sort of the ongoing accounting work to finish off the prior year.
Can you please speak up so the
Oh,
people
sorry.
in the line
Yeah.
hear?
Thanks. When is the 2023 audit going to be available?
So the 2023 audit report, audited financial statements are presented to the board at the April board meeting. So they are posted soon after that. So most of the audit work is done over the month of March. But the work of our internal finance team, most of what it's doing will be wrapping up in the next week, and then the auditors review our statements over the coming month. Okay, so generally there's, we'll jump over to property assessment values. So generally smaller increases in 2024 compared to prior years. And reminder that the assessments are based on the previous year's July property values. So does it mean taxation will go up or down by the same amount? No, it doesn't. I'll get into that a bit later. And it's useful to sort of understand that assessment change for an area that could be broken up into market and non-market changes. So the market change basically means that a current inventory of properties is worth more because of, BC assessment uses recent sales information, and if sales prices are going up, that will increase the value of the current property. But the other thing that affects the total assessment value in an area or a municipality, if there's new construction. So that will increase the assessment base in a rural area or a municipality. And so we call that non-market change. So that's basically new construction, renovation activity, subdivisions, and things like that. So a quick slide on how property taxes for regional district services are calculated. So on the left-hand side, so for each service, we go through a budgeting process and we look at the expenses, revenue items, capital projects, and all those sort of items. We do a budget for that service and requisitions, and the requisition then required to balance that service out to basically a zero bottom line. So we're not allowed to forecast out a deficit or, for that fact matter, a surplus for any service. So we work out the requisition amount. Separate from that, that's why there's a line in the middle. The BC Assessment Authority, which is a provincial authority, does all the property assessment and determines those values. So we're not part of that process. We don't have influence on that process, or the regional district doesn't. So those are two separate processes. And then you can combine the two for each service to determine a tax rate per thousand. If that service is assessments based or tax are based on a tax rate. And then we multiply that for the assessed value for each individual property. And we come up with the property tax for that individual property in the regional district for each individual service. So if you look at the financial plan and the header sheets, you can see that each rural area municipality participates in anywhere from 12 to 20 different services. And so each service will have a tax rate, a different tax rate in each area. And I'll go over that a little bit further on. Any questions on that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is a table of all the residential converted assessment changes 2023 to 24. So for this meeting, we're looking at H, Silverton, and New Denver. So area H had a 4% increase in residential assessments overall, but that's sort of split just under 3, and about 1.5% of that 4% was a non-market change, so a fair amount of construction activity in area H. And then New Denver, a larger increase of 11% assessments. Most of it was market-based, and Silverton as well, 3% increase, and the vast majority of that was a market-based change. So this graph here, the blue bars are the 1-year change in assessment for each area municipality listed at the bottom. And the orange bars are the 8-year average, so going back 8 years on a compounded basis. So we could see that New Denver's got one of the third highest 1-year change. We go over to the left a bit. H is sort of in the middle, just below average, and Silverton a bit lower than that. What's interesting to note, in a 1 year, if you look at 1 year, you've got quite a range, anywhere from -2 all the way up to almost 15. So almost a 17% range in assessment values. But you go back 8 years, there's a much smaller range. Slocan's a bit of an outlier, but about a 5 to 7% range. So, there's so many areas here, we can't look at an 8-year, year-by-year history, but it's sort of interesting that 1 year, one area moves up and then another year does, depending, it's sort of the change spread. So Nelson would have been on the far left of this chart a few years ago, and they've kind of moved to the right. But anyway, this shows the 1 year and the 8-year change. So here's just the dollar numbers and the percentage changes for the 3 New Denver, Silverton, and area H in a smaller table. Okay, so this is what I talked a bit about before. This is what we call the cover sheets. And basically, these are the front of the financial plan. And so this is for Area H. And it shows for Area H the change from 23 to 24, both in assessments and the requisition. So that's the taxation dollars for each of the services listed on the left-hand side that everybody in Area H participates in. So everybody in Area H participates in these services. So we can see a total dollar requisition growth of about 74 and 3, about $77,000 for Area H from 23 to 24, divided amongst those services there. And then there's that tax rate per thousand I talked about. It's moving up from about 82 cents to 84 cents per thousand, getting us to about that 7% increase in taxation for those for these services. Any questions on this? This can be a bit complicated.
Yeah, Casey here, Councilor for New Denver. Just a quick question, just so I understand correctly. Just one I'd like to point out, just from my understanding, S203, it's 3 from the top. It's the Regional Parks, New Denver, Silverton, Spokane.
Sorry, S2, oh, third from the bottom. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Is that the Roseberry Parklands budget? Is that, or this requisition, I should say? Is that correct?
Can I answer that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that includes all the parks in Area H. That is, Roseberry, Galena Trail, Parklands, Bigelow Bay, and as we move south, Winlaw Park.
Okay. Okay, because that makes more sense when I just look at the number affixed to it, the 188,500, and it's quite different from what the budget we were looking at for our area.
And that's why the difference, because it's the parks that are in the south, and it's actually Chris Melly Beach Park also.
Okay, okay, that helps me out. Thank you. Is there a follow-up question?
Yes. Yeah.
Briefly, will there be a breakdown where would you just look at the individual budgets for each area and then combine them if you were wondering about any of the numbers? You just have to do your own detective work, I suppose, if you wanted to find that out. Like look at different minutes from different meetings and look at the budgets and see where they come to, or just out of curiosity?
So for each one of these services, so the detail is in the financial plan for each of these services.
Okay,
I'll just, if you haven't seen it, well,
that's fine. If it's there, I'll look for it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it breaks it out into all the various, the revenue items, taxation, user fees, and then all the cost items, salaries, rentals, utilities, and such. So all that detail is there for each one of these services. And then the financial plan, it lists out all the different areas that pay into it and what their requisition is for that service. So quite a bit of a detail there explaining that.
Okay, thank you.
The conservation service is zero this year?
A great question. So the conservation service is a parcel based tax. So you can't really jump it in here because it's not assessment based. But if you could look at S292 and see the total budget for that service, and basically it's $15 and change in per parcel. A little tricky to read. I'll see if focusing does anything. My guess is probably not. A tiny bit, maybe. Okay, so that previous slide showed, I'll just jump back to it. These are all the services that everybody in Area H participates in. So when we look in our draft financial plan, at the bottom of this table, there's another section, and I split it out into another page on in the presentation. Now here's the list of services that only certain properties participate in that service. For instance, Fire Protection New Denver only a certain number of properties around New Denver participate in that service, like in the rural area. And same with all those other services. So you can see the total assessment value. Some are only like 2.7 million, so a very small group of properties participate in street lighting in South Slocan versus Recreation Commission defined area H, a much larger, almost 80% of the properties in area H participate in that service. So we don't lump these all in to come in to add to that rate per thousand, because then that rate per thousand becomes meaningless, because it's really depends on where you live and now in which of these services you participate in.
And this is only the rural area,
This is only rural. So we will,
and yet says area H.
Yeah.
Excluding the municipalities.
Yeah. So we will show New Denver and Silverton in the next couple of slides. So any questions about this part of area H? Okay. So here's the village of New Denver and the services that its residents or property owners participate in. And there's no defined areas like in area H. So everybody, each property owner, property in New Denver participates in all of these services. So it shows that the shift in assessment and the shift in requisition. So about a $6,000 increase in total requisition. And actually a decrease in the rate per thousand property value, driven largely by the increase in assessment. So overall change is about a 4% increase from the rural districts portion of taxes. If you live in that municipality, you're also going to get taxed by the municipality. I believe there's like school taxes, hospital board taxes. So today we're just discussing the rural districts portion of your property taxes. So here's the village of Silverton, and one of the few areas actually showing a decrease in taxation. The other interesting thing, if you want to call it interesting, is what happens is, as we saw previously, not everybody's area's assessment goes up by the same amount. And so one area might go up 14%, their total assessed value of the properties, another might go up only 2 or down a bit. So when that happens, we get what we call an assessment shift. So an area or a municipality whose assessment value went up a whole bunch is now going to take a greater share of the taxation for any services it shares with other areas. So any sort of question on that? Your assessment does drive your taxation from that perspective, but it also could, inside an area, if your property, individual property went up more than somebody else's for whatever reason, you're going to pay a greater share, you have a greater increase of taxes than they would have. So there's lots of things at play here. It's with relative assessment values, not only with somebody who lives down the street, but somebody who's in another area or another municipality where you participate in the same service. One of the areas where we really see big shifts on it is in Caslow and Area D, and Area D is the rural area that surrounds Caslow. Well, this year we're seeing Area D is seeing a big increase in assessments, and so they're taking on a much larger share or larger share of the services it shares with Caslow. So it could have a pronounced effect on your taxation, but once again, the rural district doesn't calculate those assessment values, and they could change for any number of reasons, but it's primarily, people coming in and paying more for property values than people did last year in that area. For some reason, becomes more attractive, or any number of reasons. What's next? So tax rate changes per thousand. So we see New Denver and Silverton actually decreasing, and area H going up 2 and a bit %. So here's the overall taxation change. So I would sort of the far right column for each area in each municipality for the regional district portion of taxes. So Silverton decrease. And as I talked a bit about area D's having a 14% increase. So this is the total change in taxation for that area, including the market and non-market portion. So you can subtract a percent or so from this. So the bottom average for the entire regional district on this table is 9.3. And so the average value of new construction would reduce, if you took that out, would reduce the average increase for current property owners to about 7.9%. But as you can see, it varies quite a bit from -2 to +14. Any questions on this? And this is included in the combined or the consolidated financial plan package. The draft that's currently online, and then the final one for consideration for the board, and then the final one that gets posted that's sent to the province. So 2024 overall outlook. So the projected overall tax increase from the previous table, 9.3, but once you deduct the new the properties that had construction or major renovation activity, we're down to about a 7.9% net change. Throughout the budgets, the individual services, there's an increase on staff salaries and director stipends of 6.2%, which is a consumer price index or inflation-driven increase. It's a actual catch-up from previous years because we use about a 2-year average to calculate that inflation change in salaries and stipends. And so for directors, that formula is in bylaw. For staff, it's part of the terms and conditions of employment that wages will be adjusted to inflation. So we were asked to look back. Is that equitable to use inflation as an index for salaries? So we looked back at the broader public sector, the BCGU, both 7-year period and a 24-year period, and wage increases for a large portion of BC public sector employees has basically matched inflation. So we're basically following the regional district with both for directors and non-union staff is following that. We should note here we do have some union employees, and their wage rates and changes are negotiated every 2 or 3 years, depending on how long the current agreements are, the length of the current agreements. So that inflation, so not only affects salaries and those costs, it also affects all other costs. And so inflation and supply chain constraints are continuing to affect many services, projects, initiatives, and goods. And often those inflation factors will exceed what's actually published in the Consumer Price Index. So the Consumer Price Index is a very small, I shouldn't say very small, but it's a subset of economic activity or goods in the economy. If you're looking at what we've seen in increases for contractors, for construction, a lot of the goods we purchase, we've seen much larger than sort of these 4 or 6% increases over the previous years. One instance, I don't have the graph this year, but from 2019 to now, the price or the cost of a new fire truck's gone from about $400,000 to over $700,000. So a massive increase in there. I spoke with our capital projects manager yesterday, and it was yesterday, and he mentioned, yeah, there's things we're going out buying PVC pipe, and we're still looking at 20-30% cost increases year over year over that. Construction, a lot of contractors are coming back to us and saying, yeah, my wages gone up. Not only that, the cost of buying new equipment's gone up, and the money I had to borrow that now, interest rates have gone up. So when you add it all up, yeah, it's my cost of what I'm charging you is going up more than the inflation numbers. So all of that added in is having an impact on many of the costs in the budget. And that's affecting the regional district from the perspective. We also borrow short and long term for projects, other initiatives. And so we're seeing that increase in borrowing costs. Offset from that is a partial offset from increased investment income. But that investment income largely flows into our reserve funds because otherwise our reserve funds would be falling behind to inflation. So we don't flow those directly into each service to reduce taxation. We flow those into the reserves in each one of those services. And then the other big project we're working on is the implementing an asset management program. So we're in the planning stages of that. We've got an external consultant that's working, doing a bit of analysis and survey. So we expect that report to come out in the coming months. And from that report, we'll be implementing or proposing an asset management plan or a more formal asset management plan for the regional district as a whole. We've got sort of bits and pieces of one through the regional district. For instance, utilities is gone has gone further down the road on that. Has a full inventory of all the all the pipe and the work required over many years forward, 10 or 20 years forward. And we're doing the same thing for all assets in the regional district. Any questions on that? Both, yes, Alex. Yeah.
I'm curious if the RDCK has statistics that give some kind of measurement on the disposable money that constituents have in the region. And the reason I'm asking that, I'm sorry, but I really intended to try and find this figure today, bring it here. I just couldn't do it. But I sense that there's been a decline in personal wealth or personal disposable income probably since about the start of COVID, and that the trend is downward. And I'm thinking of that in terms of how does that relate to increasing taxation, because it would appear that taxation is certainly going up, and I think there's an assumption that services will remain the same, which I can understand why the taxation would go up. But the unrest that I sense around the valley, it's largely based on the idea that the costs of RDCK are increasing quite significantly, but personal incomes aren't. And I don't know if this is of any value, but I know today we were trying to get some sense of where personal incomes are. And I think we came up with some kind of statistic that suggested the average family income in RDCK is $150,000 a year. So I don't know. I guess what I'm asking here is, does RDCK consider what their taxpaying citizens are facing in terms of their ability to pay tax? And if so, would it make sense to try and follow that trend? We're talking about CPI and things on the increased side, but what about the decreased side? And in relation to how I would expect that to be dealt with, I would be thinking about essential versus non-essential services and places where some restraint might be able to be practiced to keep those meters managed.
Okay. Well, I'll answer part of that, and Walter will jump in because I think he addressed that a bit yesterday about changing or reducing services. So we generally don't look at that because there's other factors besides disposable income. So we don't have access to all of that, and we don't have a team of economists, or that information is not generally readily available. But there's also a wealth factor out there. It's not always your income that gives you the ability to pay taxes. There's also different levels of wealth out there that exist. So somebody might be retired, have little disposable income, but they've got access to a large level of funds, right? So we don't have access to any of that information and to drive our decisions. So the budget's primarily driven by the services as established by bylaw, and the cost required to run that service. So if you get to that point of like, okay, we really need to start paring back these services, then that's where you get to the process of, okay, what services do we eliminate, or is there any level of services that we could reduce in current services? Well, that gets really tricky because a large portion of some of these services is fixed, or there isn't much room to do anything with. Like, for instance, fire protection is a lot of our services are driven by regulation. And so we can't just say, oh, we're not going to get new gear, or we're not going to replace this, or we're going to stretch things out. A lot of and the same thing with resource recovery. We got the Waste Management Act and other regulations that drive what we need to do, and those are changing all the time. And as well as the just like property owners or families are subject to inflation, the regional district is as well. As far as removing services, I mean, Walter can speak to that again. Reduction of services gets tricky because there's an element of people that say, no, let's reduce services and pay less, and there's an element that no, we want to maintain that level of service, or we even want more. So if you go to Castlegar today, there's like, we want more ice rinks, we want more of this, and we want more towards recreation. And there's people in Castlegar who are, they want something different. So there's this sort of this tension that exists out there, and there is a process through the board of directors, to consider that, and whether it's a reduction or elimination of service, or a reduction in a level of service, then that would be largely driven, through the board. So I don't know if Walter wants to speak a bit about that.
I appreciate the question, but it's a hard one to juggle. There are some services that we're mandated to have. I think you have touched on them. And there are some, I don't know if they're discretionary services or not, but as directors, we don't choose what service the community wants. We respond to the community request. And the ability for us to provide that service, when the service is requested, the regional district wants to provide the service to the best of their ability. So without shortening the community or providing an unsatisfactory service. And that does cost money. So most of the services that I can only speak to Area H that were established during my tenure by a survey. I don't go out there because I get 5 or 10 phone calls to establish a service. I do a survey. And I'll give you an example. A little while ago, there was a survey on dog control, on noise, and on unsightly premises. And unfortunately, not everybody responds to surveys. So we've got a certain percentage that respond, and take a look at that percentage that responds. And if there's a majority requesting that service, I provide direction to, actually a recommendation to the board that we look at doing a feasibility study. If it's possible to do that service, we do a feasibility study. And then if the feasibility study comes back, yes, it is, and we define the area that service is requested. It could not, possibly not be all of Area H, could be just a defined area. And a good example I gave yesterday was mosquito control. which is a defined area of, Winmont. There is a cost associated with the feasibility study and hiring a contractor to go out there and provide us reasonable costs for mosquito control. And then the next step in the process is to get electoral assent to establish that service. And the way that I've been doing that service is through a referendum. The referendum went out, question was asked, and the defined area voters were entitled to vote on, and actually it was defeated. And normally, I would not go out there with the intent of establishing a service unless I was sure of the survey result that we would establish that service. That was a little bit of a surprise for me, because the response that we got on the survey was, yeah, we want mosquito control. Mosquitoes are biting us. And as you heard Maggie yesterday say, well, they're not biting me and I don't want that service. Why should I pay for it? But unfortunately, if you're within that defined area, that's where the referendum was, and you have to pay for that service. So it got defeated. And then the other one was the library service. And that's a contribution to the Nelson Library, which when I first got elected, there was a request for library service in Area H. So we combined, and there was Area E and Area F. Area E is the Balfour area, and Area F is the Bonington area. So we got together and we bought the library, they gave us a figure, this is what they would be looking for contribution from Area H, contribution from Area F, and contribution from Area E. So we did a referendum, and there's two ways of doing that. We could have combined it all into one referendum, but there was a concern that Area H has got a very high population compared to some of the other areas, and if the majority of Area F didn't want to, or Area E did, or I should say Area H did not want the service would not happen even if Area E and F wanted that service. So we went separately, and that was at my insistence that we do separate referendums. So one area doesn't drag the other area into a service. And I don't know if you're familiar with the library service, there were two other referendums that failed. So we did a referendum, and surprisingly, 67% of the respondents in the referendum were in favor of establishing a service. So we established a service. Now, when you establish a service for the first few years, you don't want to increase taxation in that service. But now we're faced with increasing costs or whatever. If we want to maintain that service, we have to increase our requisitions, just like what you mentioned. So the decision here is, do we want to maintain the service we have and increase the requisition, or do we want to reduce the service? So, and that's a tough decision to make. I have no residents that called me and say they want a reduction in the service. Everybody wants an increase in the service. So that's a lengthy explanation, but I gave you a couple of examples. So to mull over, and this is what we as directors are facing, at least I am facing.
This is a slightly different aspect, but I mean, we see the property assessments going up steadily. And I'm certainly aware of people who are now finding it difficult to stay on the properties they've been on for a long, long time. It's becoming unaffordable for them to stay, and the option is to sell and go elsewhere. So for those people, especially, I would see that the increasing taxes and their decreasing amount of resources to support those taxes is going to become an ever increasing problem. And so once again, I guess I'm going back to RDCK and saying, it would be really good for you to have a sense of where people's worth is in the district you represent, because at some point you may consider it important back to the constituents and say, look, this is becoming a burden that's just too difficult for some people. Here's a proposal of where we could cut a little bit. And the only two areas that I see that are significant there are areas where there's an overlap of services that either provincial and federal governments cover, which, and then non-essential services, as I said before. Those would be the two obvious areas to cut. I don't think anybody in your constituency is going to be asking for a reduction in essential services.
So in response to you, like I mentioned, to establish a service, it's not because I want to establish a service, we get the request of my residents. To reduce the service, I would respond to requests from my residents, not one or two, but a survey. But a survey would cost money to do that. So, and that would be my choice, what I surveyed. So if I get, basically, a lot of my residents telling me, Walter, we don't want dog control. And we haven't established it yet, but we will be establishing ways that the people want dog control. Or if they come back and say, we don't want dog control. Well, then, I go back and say, well, look, go out there and, do a poll of your residents. How many people in that area don't want dog control or noise control? And if there's a majority of people in that defined area that don't want it, then we would take a look at the do a feasibility assessment of reducing and what do we have to reduce. But until I get direction from my residents, I would just, it'd be my best guess.
Thank you.
I want to add to that, some of the requisition increases in the services, both the absolutely essential and the marginally essential services, are due to pressures that local government gets from other orders of government. For example, emergency planning, and I believe most people consider that to be an essential service, is becoming increasingly expensive due to provincial statutes that are being updated, and we're waiting for some more information on the new emergency disaster assistance program that is increasing the amount of emergency planning and response that local governments are going to be held responsible for, and we have no idea whether and how much of that cost is going to be given to us by the province, or if we are going to have to tax for a service that we're being required to deliver in a particular way. So we really are aware that people are being caught. Many people, including my own family, lives on limited income, pensions. A lot of people living on fixed incomes. Costs are rising, and we're doing everything we can to keep our costs under control. It's not always possible. And it's, we're doing what we can.
Thank you, and I guess I would just, it's repetitive from yesterday's RDH meeting itself, but there was quite a bit of discussion about the importance of pushing back on the provincial government when they are looking to download their problems on you. And so I think you have a lot of support in your constituents. They need to be really taking a stand on that, because they can't just keep it on you to absolve their problem. It's going to have an impact on everybody.
Yeah, absolutely, and I really appreciate that you can see it in those terms, that you can understand that we are getting
Well, I can see it getting
for
squeezed.
other orders of
Yeah.
government.
Yeah.
Look down loading ones, and we do push back. We better do it, but we do push back.
A good example of the pushback is at the Union of Municipalities, when we had the fire commissioner, who basically said, all your fire halls will have to have indoor and outdoor training. And not very often you get an opportunity to get up to the mic to speak. There's generally a lineup, and I'm not too big a stature, so I can't push people your size aside. They'll push back. So I did get a chance to get to the mic at one time, and I says, when you basically indicate that we have to have that training, our volunteers are there, they're used to going to, and I think I explained that at the last meeting, to a 1 week, practice, etc. But now they've got to spend their weekends. They have day jobs, and they're asking to get paid for it. And I don't blame them at all. I mean, that's, if I was there, I'd want to get paid for that too, for showing up on practice on Saturday and Sunday on my days off from work and get called out all hours of the night. So I told the commissioner, I said, whenever you insist the additional stuff that we have to do in real areas, send us a bag of money. And that was not well received.
I think that there'd be a willingness on the part of a lot of your constituents to back you up on these things too. And by communicating that to us, we can say, well, it's not fair. It's not fair to expect everybody here to keep increasing taxes, and it's not fair to see the squeeze on you. But I mean, I can see a lot of people here. We have quite an active community, and I can see a lot of people being willing to support you and taking that message to the province.
And just to respond to that, I don't know what success we would have for one area. This is province-wide. So it takes a lot of work to get other regional districts on board and have the same thing. And there's, I believe, 28 regional districts within the province, and each regional district has their representation, and we do try.
You might have to be the leader, but maybe the others will follow.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, we're just over around halfway through. Can we do a sound check? Joe or Amy, how's the sound?
Sounds good. Just the same thing I think Amy would confirm as last night. Just sometimes the questions can be difficult to hear.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
I can concur that you guys sound pretty good. When Leah was facing, kind of looking different directions, we couldn't totally hear her. And then the audience is hard to hear, but yeah, same thing as last night, just the owl, it's hard to get there.
Okay, we'll make sure people speak up. Thank you.
Before you go on, chat is not working here. I put a couple of postings in chat and they got rejected. So, for the audience that are virtually, you can wave your hand or do something so we can recognize you if you want to speak.
Walter,
Or
I
try-
can watch chat as well. I'm on chat.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Amy.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm gonna rejoin some online, so I haven't had time to keep today.
Okay, all right.
See you guys online.
Thanks for coming there.
All right, we'll move on to the next slide. So 2024 also, as I talked before, we have a new updated strategic plan. So working on alignment with that. A lot of the plan focuses on effective and efficiency of operations administration, transparency engagement with the public, which is part of this meeting, as well as the new website and a few other things. Continuing focusing on those core services that make up a large portion of the costs across the regional district, resource recovery, fire, and recreation. Manage assets and service delivery in a fiscally responsible manner. That gets back to the asset management plan and getting some broader guidelines in place for asset management planning, which looks many years down the road, 10, 20, 30, or 40 more years down the road. And that's we're more consistent with across the organization with that. Okay, we'll go through some of the services. So we have some of the numbers there. So S100 is the general administration service. So all the areas participate, across the region participate. So this includes corporate admin, finance, IT, human resources, CEO and the municipal directors. There's that same 6.2 wage increase, mileage rate increase slightly. Some post-pandemic training opportunities continue. The IT and cybersecurity costs are seeing fairly large increases. So years ago, the model was you go buy a piece of software, install it on your computer, and you paid for it once and it lasts however many years. So the regional district has been on Office 2016 for the last 8 years. You know, you bought it once for, I don't know, $400 or $500. Over the course of 8 years, you're talking $35 or $40 average per user over that year. And now Microsoft 365 says, we're not supporting that anymore. You're at risk using that software, and we're not giving you any more security updates to it. So the only option is to move to Microsoft 365, which is a subscription-based model, and costs have basically gone up by a factor of 10. So we're going now to an annual cost increase of somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 per year just for Microsoft 365. And we have a whole nother slew of applications that are kind of following in the same footsteps. So we're managing that to the best as we can. You can't just necessarily just drop an application you've been using and switch to something else. So if that opportunity exists, we investigate it. If it doesn't, we, in many cases where we're price takers, with IT. And as you're probably well aware, cybersecurity, risks keep increasing. So our resources allocated to that are also increasing. There are notes or just, okay.
No, Bill, I'm just looking at chat. I can't send a message to them to put their name in chat so we can recognize them.
Okay.
But
So, as mentioned before, there's a $70,000 for completing a new website. So that was approved by the board in 2023. So the plan is to have an updated website to the current plan by the end of this year. And in this service, the year-over-year taxation increase is 11%. Rural admin, this is the rural director expenses, fire services, overhead, and bylaw services. So the same CPI increase. One of the good news stories here is we've been successful in receiving a $474,000 grant for to support fire training programs that'll cover wages, equipment, and other training costs. There's a 15% increase in requisitions, mainly driven by the full staffing complement and bylaw and fire services, as well as the CPI increase, and as well as some funds for a new fire services command unit. So we'll go over some of the smaller services. So building inspection, permit revenue has definitely softened from the peak from 2 years ago, and with some lower construction values. So that's having an impact, but we've increased last year's building fees, so but that hasn't offset the decrease in activity. We've been onboarding some new staff to increase the customer service and other improvements. So building inspection got hit hard. There was a huge increase in activity over the last couple of years, and we've had a fair bit of staff turnover there for a number of reasons. Our building department, they really they travel large distances. There was quite a bit of pressure on them, so now we've got the staffing to the level we need, and we're looking at some internet-based applications that will further increase customer service. Planning operations are stable and on budget. We're receiving some provincial funding to help address the change in housing regulations, and there's a number of projects that are either completing or underway with planning. GIS, I think a 2% increase in taxation. So that the service is continually looking to establish new funding models to fund some of its internal and external projects. The local conservation fund has now expanded to include Area F this year. So H joined last year. And so we're still looking at establishing a committee to overlook that fund. So last year, $130,000 awarded for 8 projects to take place this year. Yes.
Is there anything online for the projects?
yes, there is.
Where would they?
I go to the regional district website. They're online, and they were presented at our, I believe, the last board meeting. So the minutes of the last board meeting should be available here for March, or it could have been the meeting before, but they are available, and a lot of the projects are in Area H.
Thank you.
So community sustainability, so Silverton Area H participate, New Denver doesn't. So there's some projects related to drinking water and watersheds, some initiatives, a couple partnerships involved with some work in those areas. And then the climate action initiative. So last year, as a step was taken back on that, some further community engagement initiatives took place, including about 12 or more public meetings. So all the information gathered from that and from our engagement platform is being curated and will go for I guess an amended plan we brought forward this year. And so this includes a couple climate ambassadors and continued annual reporting to SOCA.
I want to make a comment about the community sustainability projects. I think that next slide as well. That service contributes a small amount of money to each of the projects that we decide to sponsor. And then that amount of money is matched and far exceeded by grants from other organizations and other borders of government. So our $20,000 actually gets parlayed into 200,000 or more in order to undertake the project.
Thank you. And some further projects related to food and agriculture and energy. Do you want to speak to these? Not particularly. Okay. All right. Emergency management, which was brought up earlier. So again, so emergency management is basically looking after planning and preparation for potential seasonal flooding, wildfires, and droughts. So there's a new Emergency and Disaster Management Act is coming into play, which is going to increase the burden and the requirements. So we're still waiting to hear if there's potential for any funding and other opportunities to offset some of that work. So this, includes emergency plans, risk assessments, and consultation, potentially updating bylaws and policies and procedure documents. So we've got our neighborhood emergency preparedness program falls under this service, as well as some fire smart initiatives and community wildfire resilience plans. So the cost for this service is in what we call an allocation service, A101, which is not directly funded by taxation. There's no requisition line on there, but the various areas through the regional district participate in emergency planning services. So S161 for Area H, Silverton, and New Denver, and then that service funds A101. West resource recovery. So this is basically the waste recycling and organic service for the Castlegar, Area H, up through the Slocan Valley, the Cusp, and Area K. So 4% taxation increase and 10% increase in tipping fees. And some of the projects taking part this year, legacy landfill assessments. So there's landfills that go back 40, 50, or 60 more years. The regional district is responsible for, or currently responsible for, doing assessments and making sure that any work required from those assessments is done. So we're going to start those assessments this year. And Udashenia and the Cusp hydrological assessments, Udashenia design operations and closure plan. So these design operations and closure plans look forward 30, 40, 50, or 60 more years. That's how far we have to plan ahead with landfills about how we're going to manage them, how we're going to close them, and how we're going to operate them. So there's an update coming to that. Transfer station upgrades at the Slocan, Roseberry, and the Cusp transfer stations. And then there's a Central West compost facility just out of Salmo outside Salmo that began operations in Q3 2023. So it may not directly impact the residents in H and New Denver and Silverton, but what it does is it reduces the volume of organics that flow to the Shenia landfill. And so therefore extends its life and reduces emissions at that landfill, which basically get passed on as a reduced cost for any areas whose waste flows to that landfill.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just curious, the problem with some of the recyclables, that's been going on over the last few years, not being able to market them. And ultimately that material going into the landfill at obviously extra cost. Plus no revenue. Is that still ongoing?
No. Actually, what we have is we've got 4 depots that primarily accept all the recyclables, and then they're hauled out by, I forget the name of the.
GFL?
Yeah. And they're hauled out, so they're not going into the landfill at all unless people that go to the landfill put them in black garbage bags that we're not aware of. So that the diversion of recycling and organics increases the life of the landfill. So like, for example, the Otishenia landfill, to cap that landfill is a cost associated with that. And we are regulated that we have to cap it so it doesn't pollute the area, etc. By extending the life or extending the use of it. And if we cap, then we have to find a new area for a landfill. And that's hard to find. Nobody wants a landfill in their backyard.
Yeah.
And we're really restricted as to where we can put landfills. And we have to bank them for landfill closure. So when, for example, in Shania, 50 years from now, has to be taken out of service, there are measures we have to take to ensure that it's not going to spew pollutants into the surrounding environment. So we're having to save money each year into the reserve fund that can be used for that when that happens. So that's a cost every year.
Yeah, and then speaking of recycling, that's one of the areas that the regional district receives some funding for it, but it covers a very small percentage of the cost of actually recycling. So it's something that we do push back at the province at, and they're very, hey, we need more funding for this. There's recycling programs should be self-sustaining, but they're not from our perspective. So Recreation North, so continued successful granting program to ensure, to local groups to ensure communities in area H, Silverton, New Denver have vibrant recreation opportunities. Public use of the fitness center continues to increase. In 2024, the goal is to activate the gymnasium with regional district program. Parks, Galena Trail Project. So bridge installations planned for this year with grant funding from the federal government or federal grant funding. And then at Bigelow Bay, washroom completion and trail work. Just a graph of the growth of parks through the regional district. Going back, I believe, to the 70s, but the real growth started in the 90s. So lots of parks and new parks for across the regional district. Some of the recent increases, the last major one there is the Christova Regional Park. So that's that last big upswing. So great to have parks, but as we discussed, they require resources to manage and maintain. So one of the changes in the budget. So I believe the board meeting a couple of weeks ago, or a special board meeting, there was a proposal to add some maintenance staff for park and largely based on graphs like this and the work requirements. Option 2 in that proposal was approved. Water utility services, so S260 Roseberry Water, so 15% user fee increase and 10% parcel tax increase, basically to cover inflationary increases and emergency water line repairs. So Area H Slocan, so fire protection services, I'll talk about the regional bit. So there's a regional service that looks after the management overarching safety policy governance as required by the Office of the Fire Commissioner and WorkSafe BC, management of capital projects, group bulk purchasing, and as well, being able to get significant tax savings by use of various grant sources. Those EBCM training grants, as well as I think almost not quite $1 million, I think 800,000 towards from the Growing Communities Fund for helping reduce the cost of fire apparatus. I wasn't sure how many people from Area H South would be here today, so we just briefly talk about the southern part of the valley. So S142 is the service that covers up to just past Slocan, so fire halls. A majority of the largest part of the regional tax notices is that fire service, 7% tax increase, and as many other services, cost increases due to regulations for asset replacement and fire equipment replacement, upgrades to exhaust extraction, some energy upgrades, and continued replacement of equipment, including self-contained breathing apparatus. So that's for the southern part of Area H. Anybody's from looking at that area. And then Area H, there's a number of residents that are covered in the rural area, but the New Denver contract is just S140. So there's a previous contract that's being loose terms extended. So those terms are continuing, and there's a contract renewal that's pending. Emergency 911, New Denver, Silverton, Area H all participate. So the regional district, for a large portion of the regional district, including all rural areas, is responsible for coordinating and funding the 911 services. So it does that through taxation. And also we receive some funding from basically 911 levy on landlines. And to nobody's surprise, the number of people landlines is decreasing, and therefore the revenue from those that 911 levy is decreasing, so that's got to be covered from taxation. There is no 911 levy on mobile phones. There's some push to have the federal government try to bring that into place. It hasn't been successful yet. We're not sure where it is in that process. But anyway, not only some revenue decreasing, we also have contract services increasing. So there's a 911 dispatch, so that's through the South Okanagan Dispatch Center. So that contract is increasing 80,000 to 115. And then if it's a fire-related call, that gets sent to fire dispatch at Fraser Fort George, which is the area RDs around Prince George, and that cost is also increasing this year. So we're getting some additional information systems, and there's a $45,000 projects to integrate next generation 911 into our GIS system. That's going to be funded, this part funded by grants. So that's going to take place this year. Any questions here? Yeah, good question. So we're moving from an analog to a digital service to do that dispatch. So the old equipment was, say, analog-based switching, and the new is sort of new technology, digital-based, and can operate, say, better, say, over the public, well, not the public internet, but over a wider level of communication services than previous ones. And I think it also integrates better with mobile phones is also part of that. Yeah.
What's the next generation of that?
Yeah, I think where it's headed is, and I'm not sure where this sits right now, is the plan now with this next generation, we might get to the point where you're able to text 911, which I don't think you can currently do. Are you? Okay.
Good to know.
Yeah.
45.
Oh, that's a small portion of it, yeah.
But what is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so most of that equipment was actually put in place last year, so this 45,000 is to integrate it with GIS so that when a call goes out to 911, it's better integrated with our web maps, or GIS maps. So that's what this $45,000
The
is.
dispatch is so far away, they
Yeah.
don't have the local knowledge that 911 originally was relying upon, but they do integrate their GIS global building systems. It brings it up on a map. And it will tell them where you're phoning from.
For that, I think you're.
I don't know the specifics of that. This is for the whole province, not the system. So that in Fort St. George, they will be able to go, okay, so you have said that it's at the second turn on Red Mountain Road, and I can see it on the map. And so it shortens.
You know, if that's what affecting side of the province, how we're gonna be responding, how we're gonna be responding.
Right.
It's a good.
It's not just only for fire departments, it's ambulance service, in case you can comment on that if you asked it. It's all emergency services, not just the fire departments, and that's what it's encompassing.
Ask for
And you'll still need to know where you're going, and that will rely on.
Yeah. If you really want some detailed information, you can Google next generation 911 British Columbia, and it'll bring up the history of it and what.
TV's ready for.
Yeah. Right.
Still get calls from down in the way the other side of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so, transit, area H, Slocan, New Denver, and I think, yeah, it's Silverton as well. So there's two, transit, services affecting this area. So 239 includes New Denver, Silverton, Slocan, and H. And there was $100,000 of reserves that the board voted in, a couple weeks ago, to use to offset an increase in operating costs. So that service will have a decreased requisition this year. And the North Shore Slow Canada, like 238, is the southern part of the valley. So it's seeing an increase in costs. And there's actually through transit in the West Kootenays, I believe there's 4 different services, and they all crisscross each other, and they all have a history. And the apportionment formula of those costs has gotten really complicated. And so there's an idea in place, and investigating potentially combining them into one service, making more transparent and more clear about how each service is, each area is charged for the overall transit services. So at the bottom there is the aggregate tax each area is going to pay into transit. So you can see area H is fairly substantial, and then the percentage change year over year. So New Denver is seeing and Silverton a decrease, Slocan and H are seeing an increase primarily because they participate in 238. Okay, so we're to the pie charts area of the presentation. So each of these pie charts basically shows the services and the portion of the total property tax each service is part of the, or each service is what portion it is of the property tax bill for each area. So here we're looking at the Village of New Denver, and for the RDCK portion of its tax bill, on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a pretty broad mix of services, and there isn't one main service that's capturing more than 25% of the tax bill. So we have parks there, the transit service, general admin, the refuse on the bottom, the waste management, the emergency programs we talked about, and building inspection. So a relatively small tax bill, if you look on the left-hand side, so per $250,000 of home value, there's actually a reduction in the tax bill. So if your home's worth $500,000, then you would just basically double those numbers on the left-hand side. So this is for the Village of New Denver.
For the transit, the rest there, that's the transit, right?
Yes.
The last slide, we said that we had a surplus that we're gonna offset.
Yes.
That tax bill for New Denver for transit will be 7% less.
Yeah. So if I look at New Denver, so its tax requisition for S239 is going from $24,000 to $22,000. So just close to not quite 10% decrease. So I think the 7% number that Leah mentioned. Okay, so Village of Silverton. So transit actually, in this case, almost makes up 25% of the bill. And then we've got some recreation and parks, emergency planning, general admin, building inspection, and some rec services. And again, a decrease in the tax bill per $250,000 of home value on the left-hand side there. So Area H North, here's the tax bill. So this is for properties in Area H North that get fire service through from New Denver. So the fire service cost there is probably approaching 40% of the tax bill. And then we've got parks, waste, some rural admin, general admin, each making up less than 10%. So a whole one fairly large service and then a bunch of smaller ones. And I think there's one more. So now we have somebody in Area H without fire protection, a noticeably reduced tax bill, and again, a bunch of services without any predominant ones making up the tax bill for somebody in Area H North without fire protection.
So Hal, going back to your comment earlier, we are doing what it should be done to bring the tax bills down. It's not huge, it's like 5%, 7%, 10%. We're trying.
I appreciate that. I think the importance is just kind of keep you in check.
Okay, and that's it for the presentation. So any questions from anybody, any other questions from anybody here or anybody online?
See, if you're online.
Okay, well, thank you very much for everybody for attending the meeting. Really appreciate you being here and your comments and your questions. Right, you're very welcome. All right,
Thank you.
yeah, have a nice evening, everyone.